Okay, so welcome everyone to the very first InsurTech Entrepreneurial Seminar series of the actual science program in the Department of Mathematics. So today we are very pleased to have Dr. Spensky from Allthenticate to talk on the cyber risk, how risky is cyber risk. Okay, so let me first introduce Chad first. He is now the founder and the CEO of Allthenticate. So Chad is a computer security researcher, entrepreneur, and educator who is passionate about using technology to make people's life easier and their digital system more secure. Chad has over 10 years of research experience and is a lifetime hacker. Formerly, he was a member of the technical research staff at MIT Lincoln Laboratory, where he helped them solve some of the Department of Defense toughest cybersecurity problems. Chad received his PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara in this year, in 2020, and is also a recipient of the prestigious IBM PhD fellowship. As a hacker and capture the flag player himself, he is well aware of how attackers think and believes that it takes a great offense to build a solid defense. Okay, so I also, before I pass the time to Chad, I would also like to thank Frank, who actually bring the connection to Chad with IRisk Lab. So now I will pass the time to Chad to share how cyber risk is risky today.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. So first, thank you for having me. I was definitely honored to be invited as a speaker. And this is definitely not my typical talk. Like, I think of risk all the time, but trying to actually quantify it and come up with an interesting talk for y'all. So sort of the crux of this talk, what I think will be the most interesting, is I want to first give you the mindset of an attacker. So a couple questions that I hope I can answer for you today. First, what is a cyber attack? We see it in the news all the time. Target gets hacked, all these companies are getting hacked, but like, what is that? What does it actually mean to get hacked? So I want to give you some insights into there. What does it actually look like from the attacker's point of view and from the defender? So what are companies actually dealing with on a daily basis? What are the incentives here? So I actually have a minor in economics, and I've always been interested of, what are the incentives involved and why would you do such a thing? What's the worst that can happen? I think this is kind of the doomsday scenario. And when you're looking at how much money to invest in cyber risk and things, for example, that's the big question you need to answer, right? What's the worst case that can happen? And then why should or shouldn't you care, right? Is cyber something you should actually care about, or is this all blown up and just push it under the rug and move on? And what can we do about it if we should care? So first, I think, what does it mean to get hacked? There's a bunch of different definitions of a hacker. The one I like is just take control of a system in a way that was not intended. So if you created a banking website and that's just meant for me to manage my money, but I can also manage your money, that's not good, right? So I would say I probably hacked you if I have control of your money. In the hacking nomenclature, we call it getting owned. So they say getting owned because it means that even though you're in physical possession or you built the system, I know it better than you do. Therefore, I technically own it, even though you may think you own it. This one I think is really important when you're thinking of cyber attacks. There's actually two very distinct flavors. So there's a targeted attack where an attacker specifically wants you and something you have, and they're coming at you with something that's crafted specially. And then there's the opportunistic attack. These are kind of the pray and spray attacks that I say. They'll just take anyone on the internet, and they're not really looking for any specific target. And these have very different demographics and very different ways of dealing with them. So the targeted attack is something where you have a highly motivated attacker. They're going to probably use sophisticated social engineering attacks. They'll be much harder to detect, significantly harder to defend, and they have some goal in mind. So they're coming in with some specific purpose. So when I was working for the Department of Defense, I'd always get this question, how good is my security at home? And do I use all these security practices? And my answer was no, because if someone was coming after me, there's nothing on earth I could have that I could do to stop them, right? I just made sure that I didn't have anything important at home. And if they want to get me, they're going to get me, right? There's no way I was going to go toe to toe with a really, really sophisticated attacker. The opportunistic attack, on the other hand, these could be like your hobbyist hackers, or they're just in it for the money. So they don't actually care who it's coming from. They just want to get some attack and get some reward back. And the who doesn't matter to them. So you can actually, scan the whole internet for weaknesses. So say you have some exploit on a specific web server, you just scan anyone who has a web server, hit them, right? Doesn't matter. They're likely less sophisticated. There can be some highly sophisticated, so opportunistic attacks, but that's pretty unlikely. They're typically much easier to detect because they're large scale. They're just sort of blasting us out. And these are the things where like botnets come from this category. So you hear of websites getting taken offline by botnets. That's how you generate these. Some people just do it for the thrill. They just want to hack something. Or some of these sort of lower end money scams. So not like a state actor, but someone just trying to make a quick buck. So I've always sort of thought that the best way to learn something is by doing it. So practice makes perfect, and you sort of learn a lot. So I want to walk through a simulated attack, right? So I'll kind of give you my thought process if we were going to hack somebody. So step one, we want to identify a target. So the motivation, what do we want? Are we trying to get money? Do we want to get famous? Do we just want anarchy and want to watch the world burn? Do we want to steal some intellectual property from a competitor? You sort of come up with that first, and then figure out who the best person to target is. How much risk are we willing to personally take? Are we willing to put everything on the line? Is it that important to us? And then what is our plan of attack? So do we want to blackmail this person or this company? Do we want to sell their stolen data? Do we want to steal valuable data? So maybe we want credit card numbers. Ransomware is a hot one right now. Or do we want to resell some stolen resources? So maybe we just use their compute power and we're going to resell it to other people, which is typically done with botnets. Number one rule in computer security, this one is actually kind of overlooked quite a bit. You don't hear of hackers getting caught that often, and this is called operational security. So your online identity should never, ever, ever be linked to your real identity. The second that happens, you're probably going to jail, and typically the money will lead that to happen. So online, my name is Shortman. In the real world, my name is Chad Spensky. For the longest time, I would never associate those two. I now, do fully legitimate things with my life, so it's okay that people know I once was Shortman online. But at the time, that could have been my downfall. So let's go through and hack someone. We have a fake website that we put up that we sort of show our product off on called Allthenticate. So seems like a viable place to hack, right? They have a lot of money, allegedly. So how would we go about this? Step one is you would learn as much as you can about your victim. So you want to know every single point of entry digitally and physically. So every single website they have an email server, anything they're hosting, and then look at their physical building. Do they use locks on the doors? Who are all their key employees? What is the internal hierarchy? LinkedIn is actually one of the biggest hacking tools, surprisingly. So that's who you're going to look at, like the human infrastructure that you're going to hack. And then you identify their physical location and their security practices. Does everyone there actually abide by the security practices, or does nobody care? Once we have that in mind, we're just going to look for the weak points and attack the weakest link, right? So whatever the weakest thing in their security posture is, we're going to take it down. So we have a bunch of different attacks to choose from. So this is kind of from an attacker point of view. We look at the menu. Sometimes you can just get some simple logic bugs, right? Some order of operations the programmer didn't anticipate. So maybe we log into our Allthentibank account, but we do some weird things and we just change the username, and lo and behold, boom, I'm now you, right? So things that logically shouldn't happen, but the programmer overlooked them. We could try to just brute force some things. We can try to just guess some customers' passwords. We can do some memory corruption. So these are some low-level, sort of sophisticated elite attacks. Sql injection is still kind of popular. So this is, you can literally go to the forum where you type something in on a website and you type in some malicious data. And when it goes to store it in the database, you can actually have it read the database, for example, and dump user data. Or in the worst case, even like run a shell in a full control. And then there's attacking the human. Most of this talk will be about attacking the human. They tend to be the weakest link a lot. And then one that's actually overlooked quite a bit, but my friends that do this professionally and pen test banks and other, secure facilities, walking in confidently and doing whatever you want works surprisingly well. So like physically attacking the building is always on the table, even for a cyber attack. So one example, just quickly what I would first do if I'm looking at Allthentibank is I would just do a port scan. There's allthentibank.com, and I just want to see what's open. Do they let other people log into the server? So you can see just by the simple scan, we see they have port 80, that's for HTTP. They have 443, HTTPS. Looks like it's running on a Linux server, kernel number 2.6.18. We're 85% confident that we probably got that right. So we could start looking around, right? Maybe first we just see if there's a known exploit for any of those services. So there's literally a website called Exploitdb. You can go and just download an exploit. So here, if they happen to be running rconfig 3.x, we can literally just point and click and boom, we would own them, right? So this is kind of, they call this like script kiddie stuff. This is low level, but these exploits are actually quite sophisticated. And if the service wasn't patched, you'd have a very easy attack on your victim. Or you do the hard way, right? Maybe they are actually good at security and you can reverse engineer the service and actually find a brand new 0-day bug. So you would look at something like this, some assembly code, and try to make sense of it, and then see if there's a place where the programmer screwed up and have that be your way into the company. But more often than not, social engineering is where companies fall over. You just trick the user into installing a file or leaking the password. You can get them to just put something physical media on their computer. So there's a bunch of stories of people leaving USB sticks in a parking lot, employees find them and just plug them into their laptop and get owned. And then there's an interesting case of just phone calls. So there's like in the news now, SIM swapping is becoming a big problem for Bitcoin wallets. And the way this works, they'll literally call up T-Mobile, for example, acting panicked, say, oh my God, I lost my phone. I really need you to reactivate this new phone. My grandma's really sick, something important. And they can actually convince T-Mobile to just give your phone number to them. So, the human element is always a pretty tricky one. So now we've identified the weakest link. So now we want to launch our attack on a company, right? So you have a couple core key questions that come up. Can you afford to be detected? Not necessarily, that they identify you and arrest you, but say they detect that you attack them. Would that be bad? If it's not that big of a deal, you can kind of hammer on them. Otherwise, you have to be very stealthy. How long do you want the attack to last? Is this a one-off, or do we want to be in this company for years, just sucking out all of their IP? And then what is the end goal, right? What do we want this attack to do? So if we wanted to be in there for a long time, you kind of set up a stronghold in their company, this is what's called a rootkit. So the idea is that you attack once and then you put something on the system that can actually survive reboots and really sophisticated cases. I actually did a lot of research for this when I was working for MIT. It can even persist reinstalling the operating system. So you can even infect the hardware itself and you reinstall everything and the attacker will still be there. And they could either wait for an opportune time to attack you or just want to be in your network for a long period of time. And then more often than not, the idea is to exfiltrate data. So most companies are going to be monitoring outgoing traffic. So if they see 55 gigs of stuff just getting dumped from a server that never has talked to anybody, they'll flag it immediately and you'll get locked down. There's actually a bunch of tools out there that already do this, and you can mask your data. So you can make it look like normal traffic. You encrypt it so they don't just see all these credit card numbers flowing. And you would exfiltrate it from a computer that normally talks to the outside world. So even if I hacked your internal database that never speaks, I would then probably use your admin to then exfil it to the admin, because he interacts with that machine a lot anyway. And then from the admin, have it look like normal web traffic and talk to some normal looking IP address. So it shouldn't talk to hacker.com, but it could talk to, socialnetwork.net or something that looks normal at a first glance. Okay, what about risk, right? That was the whole point of this talk. And now I'm going off on this tangent about, cybersecurity and kind of digging through the weeds. But sort of the purpose of that is to sort of inform you of, how the attacker thinks and sort of what the options are for an attack. So I think the biggest thing to look at for risk is what can the attacker do once they're in? Say they pulled off one of these attacks. The first one that comes to mind is steal data. So they can steal your customer's financial data, they can steal your company's financial data, customer information, intellectual property. I think the most ones that make the news the most are probably financial data. Intellectual property is not as newsworthy, but that is probably the more prominent hack on earth right now. Companies doing espionage on each other, countries doing espionage on each other, especially at the military level, trying to steal each other's military documents and plans for military aircraft and such. The other thing you can do is you can break stuff. You can just wipe a company out. You can delete all their data. You can actually physically break things. There's a very famous instance of this called Stuxnet, where there was an attack that was destroying centrifuges in a nuclear enrichment plant in Iran. Everybody was pointing fingers at the US and Israel. It never really shook out who did it. Turns out they had very good operational security. There's another one in the Ukraine that is widely believed that Russia hacked Ukrainian power plants and actually physically broke the power plants. Or you can just disrupt operations or disable certain computers or services. So you could have a temporary, really negative impact. There was a case, I believe North Korea hacked Sony because they aired, well, I forget called I think it was The Interview, one of the movies with Kim Jong-un, and they just took all their computers offline for like a week or two. And then there's the latest hot one, which is extortion. So by blackmail or ransomware, right? So this is either I found some naughty data that I'm gonna tell about your company if you don't pay me, or I'm just gonna hold all your company assets ransom. So how likely is it that company X is gonna get hacked, right? This is all a betting game, and everybody is sort of in the same arena where the company is betting on themselves not to get hacked, and vice versa. The attackers are trying to pick the people that they think they can actually get so that they can profit. So in a targeted attack, this actually depends on two criteria. It depends on who you are and what your security posture is. So if your company or you are an absolute nobody and have nothing interesting, you're probably fine, right? It's pretty unlikely that someone's going to try to hack my personal computer at home. I don't have anything that seems particularly relevant. I'm not particularly wealthy. So not that big of a deal. But if you're a high value target with poor security, you're probably toast. I mean, hackers are definitely probing everybody all the time. There's actually, we had an instance at MIT when you're on their Wi-Fi, you're just public on the internet, and you can just see people hammering your computer like the second you plug it in. If it's an opportunistic attack, your variable is really only one. It just depends on your security posture. So as a company, are you set up to defend against these kind of attacks? And honestly, just keeping up with security patches is typically a good start. Researchers are pretty good at finding, sort of the known vulnerabilities out there and patching them in a decent amount of time. So I tried to rank where I think the most likely attacks are here in rank order. Right now, social engineering is definitely winning. If you look at any of these ransomware attacks, even the Twitter hack that went off recently that I think got like 5 of the top 10 most important Twitter handles, that was social engineering. Password-based attacks seem to be up there in the top 3 of people just guessing passwords, using password reuse attacks, or doing phishing attacks. These push button memory corruption attacks, these are pretty popular. You hear of all these different botnet things in the news where you effectively buy a hacker kit and then you just use it like you would any other program. Web-based attacks are definitely out there where people are just goofing around on websites and find things that were implemented wrong. And then I think the last 2 are the most unlikely, but the most potent. So a physical attack, someone who's actually, ballsy enough to just walk right in the front door and take a server. Those not as risky. That takes a lot of risk on the hacker's point of view. And then sort of these really sophisticated memory corruption attacks are the lowest of the totem pole, but I think is the first thing people come to mind when they see hacked. They think like, oh, this elite hacker that understands all the inner workings of a computer. Those are really, really rare in practice. So how likely are these attacks? So social engineering, if you check your inbox, I'm sure there's, you check the spam folder, people are launching these every day. You maybe been targeted by some pretty sophisticated ones. They're pretty hard to detect if you get a good one. When we were in a startup competition 2 years ago, we actually fished like almost everybody in the competition, including the one professor that we told we were going to fish. So if you do it well, it's really tough to not get busted. Password-based attacks, there's a kind of cool website, kind of depressing website called haveibeenpwned.com that if you type in your email, it will tell you if your password has been leaked and what websites it's been a part of a leak. So, these password reuse attack things are really, really prevalent these days. The push button memory corruption attacks, where these hackers have these like hacker toolkits, these are pretty unlikely as long as you're actually doing the best practices, keeping everything up to date, you have a firewall. Web-based attacks, again, pretty unlikely. Physical attacks are way easier than you would think. Like the stories I've heard are just insane. The one guy even had the employees help him carry out their computers and load him in his truck because he's like, I'm a PC repair guy, and just stole everything from a company. He did this as his career though, not a criminal. He was hired to do this. And then sophisticated memory corruption attacks. These are pretty darn hard. I mean, this is like why I got a PhD in this field, because I think it's really interesting and you have to understand every facet of the computer. And the interesting thing about these is the second you use one, you effectively burn that exploit. And these things sell for upwards of $1 million on the black market. So if someone's going to come at you with that, you have to be worth it because they may have just lost their $1 million investment. Okay, but what if I'm targeted? This is sort of what I was saying earlier. If they're really good, if you're a company that's being sought after by a highly funded, highly targeted attacker, you're in deep doo-doo. We always used to say when I was at MIT, with enough time and money, anything can be hacked. Like hackers will go to the limits where they'll actually hack the supply chain, and the computer that you just bought comes off of the out of the box already owned. So at the higher echelons of hacking, I don't know what's going on there, but it's insane. Like the capabilities and the stuff that can be done is pretty wild. So, if if the value of the target increases, the likelihood of a hack from a target attacker definitely goes up kind of linearly. So how do companies defend themselves? This is kind of just what's going on today. Use strong authentication. So I think the whole world is kind of moving away from passwords at this point. Patch your software, limit access to important data. So just think of the principle of least privilege, that if if companies employ this, everyone only has as much privilege as they need. So you can think of the second you hire somebody giving everybody the keys to the kingdom, then if any one of those employees gets hacked, the keys to the kingdom are lost, right? So the idea is that HR shouldn't have access to all the engineering stuff. Engineers shouldn't have access to payroll. No one should have access to finances other than the finance folks. And then if you actually keep this principle of least privilege, you at least limit the breadth of an attack. Segment your network. So this, I'm sure people are familiar with VPNs and all the different sort of networking tricks that can be done. But ideally, it's the same idea with networking that you do with people, that you would keep sort of your important services on a network that not just anybody can access, but only special people. Encrypting data, protect physical assets appropriately. So actually lock the doors using something that's secure. And then the one I hate the most, which has kind of been my driver for starting my company, is that there's just so much employee training and everything is on the employees these days. Of you have to take all these phishing trainings and look out for all these different things. And my thought, if my field did their job right and we actually created good security products, we wouldn't have to train the human, right? But the computers could actually defend themselves. So what I think is the point of this talk, and after talking with you folks, the question that we're sort of trying to answer, that I'm really curious in the answer to as well, is how risky is this whole scenario, right? If a company wants to buy cyber insurance or buy some security products, sort of how do they assess their risk and what is the value of it? So the first question, do you think you'll be targeted? And if so, how good of an attacker is going to target you, right? What would they be coming after, and how sophisticated of a person might come after you? Do you have a good security staff? Are you using the best technology possible? So this one is kind of vague, but just are you actually aware of what the best is, and how close are you to it? Do you have a way of tracking software updates? This one is likely a no for almost every router and switch on Earth, but it's becoming a yes. So not just computers get hacked these days. In fact, there's some cool examples where you can hack printers by printing a PDF, and then you leverage that printer to take over an entire internal network. So software updates on everything turns out to be quite important. And then what is your worst case scenario? To me, that's kind of the biggest question, right? So at our company, I kind of think through that all the time. What would happen to our customers? What's the worst case if we got hacked? And it's never a good answer. Do you keep backups? This is becoming more and more prevalent with ransomware, right? This is the fact that the only reason ransomware exists is because people don't have backups. Otherwise, you would tell them no thank you, restore your backups, patch where they came in, and move on with your life. So how much should you care? That depends, right? How bad could it be? How likely is it? How difficult is it to defend against? And how bad are the not worst case scenarios? So what if just like an average hacker got in? Would that be, terrible for you or for society? And then sort of take inventory of your company. And again, when you're assessing risk, take inventory of the company that you're looking at, or sort of the economy you're looking at. So the knowns are what is of value. You typically know what an attacker might find valuable. How bad might it be if it got in the wrong hands? Things you don't know is who might want it and how they might try to get it, right? So that's sort of when you're trying to assess the risk, those are the things that you really have to guess at. And I think we can make educated guesses given some of the information in this talk and some of the stuff that we've learned as computer security professionals. But the really, really hard one, and what this all means and why I think we're all on this call today, is it's complicated. There are a lot of unknown unknowns, right? These things that when they happen, you say, oh my God, who would have ever thought that that would happen, right? So I think that is what makes this field so interesting, and sort of why it's so hard to wrap your brains around, because we think we have a grasp on it, and then you see an exploit come out or some crazy thing happen at some company that's like, oh my God, who would have thought North Korea would hack Sony, right? That just doesn't align as a risk assessment. But if you make the wrong movie, turns out that could happen. So really what's going on in the world with all the companies out there is everyone's just trying to survive, right? I don't think anyone has a grasp on it, even the giants of the world. So Google has admitted to being hacked. They've had to come out publicly with that. So even the best of the best are getting hit left and right. And it's just, we've kind of come to this battlefield. So at this point, I think this talk is best as a sort of conversation. So I intentionally kind of left plenty of time for questions. Sort of what I'm trying to do about this is I think we can create a product that mitigates the human in an easy and fun way. So if you want to look at what I'm up to, you can check out my company, hit me up on an email. But I, at this point, would love to take questions and just sort of see what I didn't cover, because I wasn't entirely sure what you guys would find interesting.
What's that sound? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chad. Yeah, so we do have plenty of time for questions. Anyone from the audience?
I do have a question.
Yep.
Okay. Hi, Chad. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, it's very informative. So I sort of have a question regarding the regulations. So I wonder, I believe you've heard of some regulations like 800-53 or the NIST cybersecurity framework. Those are some standards that are for companies to. Some are like compliance requirements. Some are just standards or best practices for companies to follow. So I wonder, like, what's your opinions on those, and how good are they, in terms of, mitigating the risk that companies are exposed to?
Yeah, that one's interesting. So when I was working with the DoD, we became intimately familiar with all of the NIST regulations because all of the government operations had to use that. The one thing I've found is that they become a checklist. So companies will do whatever they have to do to actually check the box. But a lot of times checking the box doesn't actually mitigate the risk, right? You find a product that satisfied one thing and you buy that product and then you get to check the box. So it can definitely give you a false sense of security. But in general, I actually think what we'll see in the future is that we'll see more regulation. So they've already, I believe it's in law now, that if you do get hacked, you have to announce that. You have to notify the public, because there was sort of instances in the past where it was such a like PR hit that companies wouldn't announce it. Like, oh my God, we were hacked, like shove it under the rug, don't tell anyone, which is just terrible for everybody involved. So I think we will see more regulation. In California, they even made it a thing that you can't push out like routers with easy to guess passwords. So that actually passed in law. So yeah, I mean, the fear is that the checkbox thing can become really problematic because you get a 10 out of 10 on checkboxes, but you could still be the most insecure company on earth just because you didn't implement it correctly or do the right thing. But I think it's a right path forward. I think having some regulations to make sure everyone's operating in some reasonable security bound is important.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and I also heard that there might be some like incentive programs that rewards companies if they do extra than just like meeting the bare minimum requirements. So I think that would be the the right direction. And okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Chad. That's the question I have for now.
Yeah, I'm all about aligning incentives. I feel like I gave a couple talks about that. That's sort of the biggest problem in our field right now is all these misaligned incentives.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions from audience? Feel free to speak.
Don't be shy, okay? And you can ask whatever you want, and Chad will answer you. And in your real life, you don't have a much chance to talk with the hacker, real hacker, right? So take your opportunity.
Yeah, you don't know the identity, right? So you cannot, as Chad mentioned, you cannot put them as equivalent. Yeah, but I do have a question. So Chad, in your talk, you mentioned two types of attack, right? So one is targeted, another one is like opportunities. For target one, so based on your observations in the past, what kind of industry or companies would be usually being targeted, or is there any particular characteristic of the company that usually being targeted?
Yeah, it seems to be any way that you can liquidate the assets quickly. So like Bitcoin has become a really big target. So Bitcoin wallets and like the Bitcoin, I don't know, I think they call them banks, but because you can immediately, once you get the Bitcoin, turn it into something of value, right? So I think that's sort of the credit cards are actually pretty hard to turn into money because you like eventually you need to get the money out of the credit card before they detect you. And if you use the card, you typically have to ship it somewhere and you'll kind of break that, digital physical wall that you put up. So people have tried to, in general, moved away from that. Even back when I was doing the shady stuff, I remember like we had like the squad that I was associated with had more credit card numbers than they knew what to do with. They just couldn't get money out of them fast enough. So yeah, any financial institution that like a hack would mean immediate monetary value seems to be really high risk. Right now, hospitals, because they've sort of set the precedent that they will pay the ransomware payments, right? And again, they'll pay it in Bitcoin, so it's a little easier to actually extract the money. That has become the hot thing to hack, because we're in a pandemic, you hit a hospital, they're just going to pay it up, and they've already said they would. So it seems like the hackers tend to follow the money until you get to like the higher echelon of like nation state actors, where intellectual property is the more interesting thing.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you very much for the information. Yeah, that is really true. Okay, great. Any other questions from any questions from the audience?
Hi, Chad. I have another question. So sort of related to what Alfred asked. So for a company, like, what do you see as in terms of like between the this being targeted, the risk of being targeted, or like the risk of having a speculative attack, which type of those risks is more problematic for a company?
Now it's interesting. I think almost all the ones you've seen in the press are typically opportunistic, where someone just happens to stumble across this vulnerability and then exploits it. But it wasn't like, oh my God, I'm gonna get Apple. It was just like, oh wow, I found this thing. Holy cow, I can attack Apple, right? So I think those ones tend to be much more prevalent, where people are just sort of poking around, looking at everything. But from the company's point of view, those are actually the easier ones to defend typically, because you kind of know what's coming. Whereas a targeted attack is when you get much more into that unknown kind of area, where you never dreamt that this guy was just going to walk in, posed as a repairman and steal your laptop. So yeah, I mean, I think as a company, your only option is really to defend against the opportunistic ones. And then just do everything you can if you think you're a high value target for the targeted attacks. So working in the DoD, I mean, they take it kind of to the limit, right? They're clearly targeted. It's the United States military. So they kind of know what's coming. They don't know where it's coming from. And then they just build up as much security as you can. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yes. Thank you, Chad. And I also have another question, which is that so your company is apparently like developing security products, right, or solutions, and I wonder, like, if in the event that so for example, some of your like customers or clients, they use your product, but they still getting hacked. And I'm not saying that your product is not good, but I think that's a risk that every software or like security product developers, they are facing. So I wonder, like, in that case, if your like your clients or customers, they have complaints, or they even like have some legal disputes with you, then how like are you like taking any preventative measures to ensure that, or like protect yourself from that kind of risk?
Yeah, that is my number one biggest fear. And actually, I don't think the legal system is caught up yet with computer science. So we actually do have cyber insurance. That's a thing that companies can buy, so that if somebody does hack us, we actually do have insurance that covers that. But the sort of liability of all these things, I still don't think has flushed out through the legal system. So in your example, we sell a security product to a customer, they get hacked, right? Maybe because our product broke, or maybe through some other means, but it's not really clear, who is responsible. And sort of the fear that I have is that computer programmers will have to carry liability insurance in the future, because is it the company that's responsible? If there was an egregious bug in there, does it now become the programmer who programmed it? Is it his manager? Is it the CEO? So yeah, I think those questions aren't well answered, and we're just kind of hitting the point where I think it's, they're frequent enough that the legal system's going to have to figure this out. And I think it's more interesting with like self-driving cars, right? If a car kills a person, you have this same huge liability question. So the second I get my Tesla and hit autopilot, I just put a lot of trust into that programmer who I've never met and this company that's, I don't know much about internally. And if that car kills me, sort of who's responsible? So I think those questions we'll see sort of play out over the next couple of decades, but it's interesting. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's definitely my biggest fear that, a customer get hacked and then come after us, and then we get in this huge legal dispute.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the answer. Since you mentioned cyber insurance, so may I, like ask what kind of coverages or what kind of protections do you get from insurance? Because we are a lot of us here are actual science students, so
Yep.
we care about insurance, right?
Yes, yeah, and that's why I think this collaboration is so interesting. So for us to get the insurance, we actually had to fill out a pretty lengthy form of, what are our practices internally? Do we use proper security protocols? Do we encrypt our data? Sort of this laundry list of things. They assured me that I got a lower rate because I actually, have a degree in this and understand it. I don't know if that's true, but it effectively, so the one we have protects us that if we get hacked and they leverage our customer data or do anything nefarious with it, it apparently covers us. I'm sure you could teach me more about it than I know. We're kind of just at the mercy of our insurance agent at this point that he didn't do us dirty, but it was pretty insightful to go through the questionnaire. It was much more in depth than I expected.
So yeah, follow up with that question. So do you think they are asking right questions?
I would have to go back and look at it. I was impressed by them. So there were definitely some that I didn't think they would know to ask. And I was like, oh, that's nice. But yeah, so I think they did a better job than I expected for sure of sort of assessing, our security posture and how easy it would be to exploit us.
So I'm sure that's kind of like going to the underwriting process. So that information is kind of considered as self-report, and that they will put it as their one of like pricing models, and try to see come up with some like premium. And I'm sure that some questions still matters compared to the other questions. That's something we try to figure out which question is the right answer, right question to ask, and how can we price this correctly.
Yeah, it's really tough problem. And yeah, I was actually shocked. Our rate was lower than I thought. Because I'm like, we're a startup, like, no, we don't have all this crazy stuff. Like, yeah, I know a lot about security, but like, we just don't have the time. We don't have the resources, right? Like, we have a security staff of like me. It's not the same. You're going to get a large company. So yeah, but like the question I thought were really relevant of like, where is your data housed, right? Like, do we keep it on site or do we store it in Amazon? Sort of how do we access it? Who has access to it? Those kind of questions I thought were kind of on point. And that's sort of the reason we host things in Amazon and only have like 2 people that have access to it, because we can't manage our data security like they can.
Hi, Chad. This is David.
Hey.
Thanks for speaking to us. I wanted to first just ask very quickly, do you, at your company, do you have an in-house nickname for the NSA yet?
We don't in our company, but when I worked for the DoD, it was always like Voldemort, right? Like that.
Okay, yeah, I've heard, like, for example, Kaspersky, they also have, their nickname, they have every company. So this sort of leads into what I wanted to ask. As a outsider, a lot of my familiarity with cybersecurity firms, it comes from research that sort of gets pumped out, I guess, as sort of like vanity projects. So I think, like, for example, CrowdStrike, they put out research and they'll use these nicknames, for example. But yeah, what I wanted to ask was, where do you see, this is sort of business side of the question, where do you see Allthenticate? What's it trying to do similar to or different from these, the set of firms which are out there? I only know a couple, that I see here and there, FireEye and CrowdStrike and Tanium and Darktrace. That's really it. That's all I know.
Yeah, so those are the traditional like security companies. Some of them I think are doing great work, and even within all the companies, there's some great work. The one thing that I kind of don't like about most of those companies, they tend to sell fear quite a bit, and then sell some, I won't say snake oil, but some products that aren't, that don't exactly do everything you'd hope and everything they claim. So what we're doing here is actually like LastPass would be a better comparison. It's really like the password problem and the human problem that we're trying to attack. So we have a smartphone app that we use to unlock our doors and unlock our computers. And then it's sort of that identity now becomes your identity at work, and you can use it for everything, and your employer can kind of keep track of all the resources, right? They know who came in the door when, and they kind of verify that. So the differentiator, we're definitely, a security defense product, whereas CrowdStrike and those guys do a lot of offensive research as well, and they do more pen testing and sort of the more fun stuff for sure. I definitely applied to Rapid7 when I was younger and thought that would be the life, just go hacking banks every day. So yeah, we're definitely just a different company. And I think, probably soon, I think you'll kind of see the security community bottom out. I know it seems like it's kind of already on that way where the hype is over, and all these companies that, have these game changing, this product's going to solve everything. It didn't go as well as everyone thought, right? I think they injected too much money too fast, and it just didn't work that way.
Okay, so just a small follow-up. So for example, one in particular, Darktrace, they really pushed the idea of AI. Do you think that's overhyped?
Okay, so as in general, I think AI is overhyped, but I don't think that means it's useless. I think that, it's just sort of the new trend. So everyone's throwing AI to everything. There are some really cool things, in cybersecurity that are coming up with AI. So again, as long as the application is correct with AI, so I don't think it's going to solve every problem, but like detecting spam, it can do really well, right? And we've kind of already seen that play out. We just didn't call it AI, we called it spam filters, but it's doing the same sort of thing. So the question, the one thing it will never do that they kind of claim and researchers have looked at for a bit and have been involved with some of the research is like detecting those highly sophisticated custom exploits. And the reason is because they're in the unknown category, right? If they were known, you would detect them easily. If they're just unknown, you see them coming, you can kind of detect them. Maybe a long-winded answer to say that it's not the cure-all, but I think there's a time and place for it.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Chart. This is Evelyn. I just have a question for you. Do you foresee your company work with a cyber insurance company? Because like you talk a lot about like cybersecurity, and if you work with cyber insurance company, you are like we will be able to decrease the frequency or severity, and in the same time, it bring business to your startup as well. Just kind of curious about that.
Never thought about it, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, like we just really started talking about what y'all are doing and sort of how it collaborates, like how it works with us. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that we can kind of definitively show, right? That if you use this instead of a password, your attack surface is dropped significantly, and therefore your insurance rates should be lower because it's just much harder to compromise. So yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just kind of curious because I know cyber insurance company work a lot with cybersecurity companies. So just to trying to like lower the frequency and severity, and also in the same time we are be able to lower the premium for our customer as well. So just kind of curious if you have thought about it. Yeah, but thanks for answering the question.
Yeah, thank you very much for asking that question. That's a great one.
Okay, so any other questions for chat? Okay, I will take the silence as no. As always, as in a lecture office hour. If it's silence, I assume no, but maybe a lot of questions, but they are too shy to ask. Okay, so I think, yeah, thank you very much, Chad, again. So you, I think Chad leave his email in his last slide, right? So if you have any follow-up questions and individual question you would like to ask him, feel free to email him. And yeah, so he also just shared.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'm as interested or more interested in what y'all are doing than what I'm doing. So yeah, it would be nice to keep this going and hear about what's going on your end as well.
Yeah. I think yeah, from our end, we do have two cyber projects is working, are working, and then most likely one of them will be ready soon, and we will definitely would like to hear one of your, some of your thoughts. So
Yeah, for sure. And if you want any more talks on like specific cyber things, I'm more than happy if you have a specific request, want to dig in deep on any one topic.
Sure. Great. Thank you very much, Chad. Okay, so let's end the seminar here, and thank you very much, Chad, again. And that's my physical hand. If you want to clap your electronic hand, feel free to do it as well. Okay, so have a good night, guys.
See you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.